We want to respond. It's a letter from Mrs. R.T. from Minneapolis. Is it? Yes. Here in Oklahoma, where we're taping these, there is a Wayne County and there is a Newton County, but no, there is no Wayne Newton County. Pretend that didn't happen. For you, we could all hold hands and try to reach the seriousness. For you people seeing this on cable TV, in some cities we are still informed that they're only showing 30 minutes worth. The second half we're taping as we do these 1 hour at a time. And the first half, so that you'll know where you are, more or less, the first half normally is taken up by a reading of what's known as Kyroots. They're one-liners, stories, parables, myths, legends, and other fol-de-roy. And as they're being read here, live and in person, to people who are semi-live and in person, there is off-camera a screen that flashes the page number, and then many people who can afford it, have a pen and a piece of paper. And when they hear one that strikes their fancy, they'll write down the page number, then they give it to me as we come up here. There's a list, and then Kyroot right off camera as always. Then I look at the number, and and he says, well, make some comment or don't, or just reread it. So that's where we are, is I'll go back and I'll reread the ones that people have requested, and then, God and Kyroot willing, I'll make some comment. And here we go. The first one is page 1, believe it or not. Someone requested. Well, there's a line through it. Oh. Wrong night. As if you could tell. See, it was a test. Okay, here we go. Well, I'm just going to reread this one since somebody wanted it. And Kyroots said, talk calms the primary world while it excites the secondary. Won't we all, since we don't have a time of prayer or reflection, won't we all just take a moment? Oh, all right. Those of you who understand what we mean around here for the time being of the primary world, that which would be absolutely necessary to live just at a minimal physical level. You would not be human, of course, but just to stay alive if you had no operational brain. The things of food, sex, and staying within certain tolerances with temperature and humidity and such as that, that would be the primary world. And the secondary would be everything above or getting into your frontal lobes or above getting into the cerebral cortex. In other words, you could think. Then that would be, everything there would be the secondary world. That is, in a sense, as important, as necessary as it seems to be. In a sense, you could do without it. You could stay alive for years, plugged up to machines, or just laying there, and as long as somebody would open your mouth and pour some rutabaga stew down you. But talk is connected to the secondary in such a way, those of you that's really been listening for a while, as Kyroot and I even had the temerity to point out that besides looking at the necessary, the primary world is the 3 big S's of sustenance, sex, and shelter, that once you are now a full-fledged human, a secondary creature, then there's a 4th S, which is speech, talk. That it is as necessary. You could not live a fully functioning life as a real human today unless you could speak. And I don't mean just physically. You could be mute, but your brain's still operating, you're talking. Life is talking to you, you talking to yourself, etc. So here it goes. Talk calms the primary while it excites the secondary. You could say, if you followed all that, you could say, I'll speak for an ordinary person that follows this, just takes it as an interesting theory or something, and they could go, well, that's not true because talk can excite the primary. Even in the law, they're known as fighting words. There are things that you, in certain jurisdictions throughout the land, throughout the world, even places that believe that they have great political, civil freedoms, it's at least in the Western world known as fighting words. from case law in the past, and that is that even though there's free speech, that you are on shaky ground at the very least if you go up to someone, if you see a man with a strange haircut and one eye and he's limping, and you go up and make some rude comment that takes into account these certain difficulties he's having. You understand? Or go up to a short person and say, "You sawed-off son of a bitching romper," something. And a person gets angry. The law will not necessarily protect you on the basis that, all right, there was certainly no battery, you didn't touch the man, there was no assault, but in a sense you assaulted him because you meant it as fighting words. You meant to be insulting. You knew he would probably get insulted, and so whatever fracas, mayhem may have arisen from that, you may not be as pristine as a priest with a chastity belt. So, back to the point, an ordinary mind could say, wait a minute, talk can excite the primary, as opposed to you saying talk calms the primary. But is that the primary? And you say, well, yeah, if the guy hits you. Yeah, but if we were not dealing with secondary causes, if we were dealing now, to take this real quick, because this has application inside one person, not between two people, because this is not a class in sociology. Really? All right. Let us say that you're going up to insult this guy. He looks real ugly. Let's say he's green, make it easy. And you're going up and you're going to make you're going to make it obviously by the dripping, well-phrased sarcasm that will spring from your lips about his color or his size or these three large triangles hooked to the top of his shoulder. But let's say there the guy stands, and for some way this could not be in a sense, but let's say that he is not really a secondary creature. And he looks like you, and he's dressed up, and it looks like that he's everybody else except for whatever you're going to insult him in regards to. But let's say he has no operational intellect. So you go up and you insult him. You put the fighting words on him. Nothing. Whereas, if we're doing this infantile, in a sense, an artificial division, which is no problem verbally, if you go up and hit the guy, without any intellect, he can hit you back. Everybody knows that. In case you doubt it, go out and slip into the zoo some night and go up to an orangutan or an elephant and give them a punch. And I'm just suggesting there's every likelihood in the world that they will punch you back. Whereas you might stand outside and say, boy, are your arms long? Your arms are longer than a bricklayer I know that's in Alabama. Boy, are you hairy. God, you smell. The orangutan may just look at you, might smile if they smile. So, back to talk calms the primary while it excites the secondary. Without going any further with that, let me tell you that based on the kind of paradigms and maps that Kyroots has been drawing out here of late, it's not a theory, it is a fact, and it serves a purpose. Because once you realize that talk is an absolute, indispensable ingredient to being civilized, to being a full-blown, functioning human nowadays, the purpose of talk is what? The purpose of sex, keep the race going. The purpose of eating is keep you going. The purpose of shelter is to keep you going and out of the untoward elements. So talk's got to serve a certain purpose. What is it? It is like food for the secondary. Back to the kind of question that Kyroots and I were proposing to you last time, without it being in any wise a question or a slight on living a secondary life, but why would a person get up, assuming you're not starving, assuming that you had a backyard big enough to grow a few turnips and rutabagas, and you already had a house paid for, or you had a brother that had a large box in which his refrigerator came that he's not using that you could live in, why would you get up at 5 o'clock and drive 2 hours in to Manhattan to pay for an $80,000 car and, to get $50 haircuts and etc.? Nothing wrong with it, but do understand, in a sense, that is not necessary to live. What makes you get up and do it? And don't take some cheap shot if you're ordinary and say, well, you're insane. Anybody does that. Or they're caught up in some ego trip. No. They're just ordinary. There's nothing wrong with it. But without talk, you wouldn't get up. Forget the alarm clock. Forget the impending mortgage. Forget that you're 2 months behind the payment. Now, you would not have been in that position to begin with were it not for talk. Talk is a kind of fuel to the secondary, to man's mind, but in the secondary is a fuller picture of what it is. Talk is not that dissimilar to the secondary aspect of man as food itself, physical food, is to his physical well-being. Whilst taking a deserved break in the library, basement, restroom, blah, 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 a man thought to himself, here's what he thought. The collective history of man, remember the collective history of man is what makes him imagine he's civilized. Why do we have history? Why do we have education? There are all sorts of ways to look at that, but getting to this one specifically. How do you know, how would you, assuming that you've now passed for being civilized? Not that you are, I don't mean it that way. But how are you raised? What's the point of institutions, education, culture, your cultural history, your religion? It's to teach you, hey, you come from a long line of, and of course what it appears to be, they can say you come from a long line of Scots, of Russians, of Muslims, of Jews, of Italian Christians. You have a certain thing to uphold. The collective history of man is what makes him imagine he's civilized. What if, we can't do it, but you can follow this kind of thing verbally again. What if you grew up in a kind of isolated environment, just you and your immediate family, which is impossible, but in the sense that you could do it and still all of you involved be playing out the kind of game that would ordinarily be available if you were thrown into the regular melting pot of civilization out there in the neighborhood, out there in your locale. But if you were grown up there and your parents tried to teach you to be civilized, can anybody think about it even before I say it? We don't have time. Think about it. How would they do it? Now you could say, well, they'd say, well, look, here's what you should do. It can't be done. I suggest you think about it. Of course, I could take the other position. I could speak for ordinary people and say, well, sure, it can be done. Your parents could say, listen, do not beat up on other children. You're not even around other children. You've never seen other children. Don't steal from your neighbor. You've never seen a neighbor. Don't curse the gods. You never even heard of the gods until they brought it up. Whatever it is, any aspect you think of civilization, if they tried to teach you, now if I was ordinary, I could say, well, they could do it. You just say it yourself. They could say those things, and the kid could say, well, what's a neighbor? And they explain it all. Sounds right, doesn't it? There has to be the outside institutions. There has to be, as always, in the ordinary development of the secondary world, what appears to be extraneous sources of authority. And it turns out to be the collective history, even though it would sound literally correct that you could take a child in isolation. Just take you as you are now, if you were just an ordinary person, educated, sophisticated, hip, and you could teach them to be civilized. You could teach them to be humane. You could teach them to be a particular religion if you wanted to. That would seem to be absolutely beyond the grasp of denial, and yet I am denying it. It couldn't be done. That's what's the point of history. That's part of the point of remembering and revering your culture, your past, all of humanity's past. It is the kind of proof, apparently, of why we should be civilized. Because look where we have been. Look where we're headed. Look how civilized have been our forefathers. Because that is oftentimes either the fallback position or the major position. Is not only are we not progressing, we were more civilized in the past. Which is always as easy to do. As long as you're dealing with the past, remember, you could dig up Mahler, paint him green, and say, see, I told you that man's, his work, just there was something fishy. Now look, you can do anything with the dead. Where else do we have them? I know, some of you can't figure that out. The royal priest so instructed the young prince, who would be a progeny of the king, which is later on in here for those of you that drew a blank, and we had a room full of apparent blanks, or at least great silent insight, where there's a Kyroot down in here that says secondary kings have no progeny. But anyway, that's way off somewhere, down the stack. Here's page 13. The royal priest so instructed the young prince, fish have no religion, for they can fathom of no God beyond the water. The epilogue, did not the brain have a skull that might spill out and then be unable to conceive of its confinement? Fish have no religion, for they can fathom of no God beyond the water. You want to take the ordinary position and say, well, that sounds fair enough. Yeah, but wait a minute. Can we all just take just a blind guess and figure there's some kind of metaphorical possibility here? So if we do, we'd say, all right, if fish did, if they were in some way, let's speak fable-like. Well, several of you have noses as big as Rousseau's anyway. So let's imagine we're speaking in fables, and that the fish represent men, and the little fish have brains and everything else like men. If they were going to have gods, even though fish do not know of any existence, back to my old equation of I plus not I equals everything, to fish, everything would be I plus water. There is nothing else. You don't tell me about fish, which are actually mammals or dolphins or whales that have to come up, smell the air. Fish, they got no desire to smell the air. There is no such thing as the air. It's them and water. To a fish, my equation of I plus not I equals everything is me, fish, plus water equals everything. But if they did have an intellect that could push the horizon and they could conceive of a God, where would it be? It would have to be outside the water because they can see the water. Now back to man. How about men so casually and seriously talk about gods? And if you said, don't split the parable, the fable yet. You say, well, where is God? Oh, he's a long way off. Well, your forefathers, at least in some realms, always thought that, up until some recent time, when it got cheap enough that places like Sears and Kmart began to sell telescopes, a lot of people say, well, God's up there behind the moon, or he's just out of sight, just maybe past the sun. But if you really push somebody, they would have to say, well, he's nowhere where you can see, and you start saying, well, hell, in a sense, now they're sending, or not in a sense, they claim that now through certain of the higher frequencies in the electromagnetic field, that they are now to the point of seeing the edge of the universe. Nobody's seen anything resembling God. Then, to keep the fable connected, you would have to say, if you were this kind of fish, you'd go, all right, you're right. If there is this kind of supreme, if there is somebody outside the closet, if somebody made the closet, hell, he's got to be outside the closet. He has got to be outside the water. That is, outside the universe. And then you can say, well, if that's true, what in the world good does that do you? How did you ever think that? Not just you personally, but how did humanity think of that? What possible use is that? That's not an attack on religion now. This is about thinking. It's not about religion. It's not about God. The priest says, fish have no religion, for they can fathom of no God beyond the water. They don't fathom of God anyway. If they did, it had to be beyond the water, because other than them, the water's it. You see, humanity can't think that way. Because if you ask humanity, all right, where is some supernatural force? Where is some transcendental force outside of this? And you look, and if you looked at the universe, and I don't mean just to the point that it takes imaging telescopes and all sorts of technology, just your mind and everybody else's. If you said, where is the gods? Where is some transcendental force? Think about the fish. The fish can see the water, because other than itself, the water is reality. Put them all together and that's it. But the mind looks around, and what it should do, in a sense, is go, well, this is it. One more time for anybody out there, this is not in any wise any sort of attack on religion. That's not the point. It's thinking. Because you'd look around and it would think, where in the world do I come up with an idea that there's something beyond this? Because my mind would be the fish, and everything I think about, which appears to be the universe, that is the water, that's it. Put them all together, forget mother, they spell everything. But the corollary, the punchline, did not the brain have the skull it could spill out, and thus be unable to conceive of its own confinement. Shocking possibility. I hope I didn't want to bring it up just to give anybody the blues, but well, somebody requested these were connected. I think I'll just read it. One guy now defines irony with a certain sarcastic tone in his voice, it says here. He defines irony thusly: others doing just about what you'd expect, while, for totally unforeseeable circumstances, I'm forced to do otherwise. And irony said, you don't need no damn definition. Which nobody asked me, but I say that irony showed a certain kind of, at least verbal restraint, even pointing that out. One guy's latest theory is the whole concept of seriousness was invented by historians the very first time, just right after the first time they were challenged. All right, as always, now that we're talking about it, forget historians as being people out there. Your mind about what has been the history of man. What if your own mind could turn on you and be this kind of challenger? Let's assume that whoever it was that challenged the historians, it's not some smart ass, just somebody points out, hey, the historians doesn't have any clothes on, that kind of thing. But now do it to yourself, that you've been having important thoughts, religious thoughts, social thoughts, that you do in fact have some sort of sham degree in a social science from some mail-order school. But you're having these thoughts, and suddenly some other part of your brain, some agitated part of a mob, is out there and just sends, in his sarcasm, sort of challenges like, well, you always believe that, but what about so-and-so? What if your mind could do what I did about the fishes in the water and how fish could not conceive, not that they're practicing birth control, but that they could not conceive of a God outside of water, because water in them equals reality. What if you were having some kind of thought, whether it be religious or the nature of why a man should operate in a certain social manner, and then a part of your brain, a little row somewhere, part of an agitated little school of minas around the courtyard of the king, said, well, wait a minute, and challenged the history of your thought. What will you do? What do you always do? What does everyone do? They become goddamn serious. Because you're fooling around, it's like the king can have a little fun with the subjects. Kind of let our hair down, undo our robe a little bit. And yet, what'll happen? Sure as hell, somebody, just one of the peons, some serf, some churl, will try and take advantage of it. Try to get close to the king, and they have a few drinks, and the king's kind of, trying to be, sort of one of the guys. And some little thought begins to kind of challenge him. Say something a little out of the way that you wouldn't have done had not the king sort of sit down there on the stoop with you and open the beer. What are you going to do? What does your core... I said, what do people call it? Not the king. Yourself. I always want to write that down. Yourself. What do you do? What do you do when you have any doubt about what you're thinking, about your beliefs? That you challenge yourself. What do you do? All right, I'll answer. I know what you do. You make a joke about it. Not. You actually, without any sarcasm, without any attack, without any aggression, you simply, getting dangerously close, of course, to being a true mural artist or revolutionist, you think to yourself, why in the world do I think that? And you, the sane, civilized you, the city you, the secondary, stable you, must pull itself up. And do what? Suddenly go into some kind of cheap tap dance imitation of Daffy Duck? No. Well, not in some matter like this. There is no choice. There's nothing to think about. You have to get what? The big S. Shit face? No, serious. Now, can you believe it? Now, even to me, this thing's beginning to make sense. One guy's latest theory is as follows, quote, the whole concept of seriousness was invented by historians after the very first time they were challenged. Now, it makes sense. I'm glad I went through that. Okay, I'll read it. A younger brain told an older brain, It's easy to be smug when you know what you're doing. And the older one replied, yeah, but even when you don't, it's still possible. And the younger one wandered off and thought, geez, have I got a lot to learn, and geez, I just hate it. I knew if I reread it, it'd be obvious as hell. Somebody did request it, and Kyroots said, secondary kings have no progeny. If you take kings, if you take everything that you or anyone, using you as an indicative, exemplary example, when you're on a roll, why not overdo it? Some people like chocolate and then nuts on top of it, and then maybe whipped cream. Some people's motto is more along the lines, an adjective works, put another one. Try if you can, even take an adverb if you can't think of the right sense, and make up your own third form of an adjective. If you took kings, secondary kings have no progeny. If you took a king as being, again, you as just a casual verbal shorthand example for everyone, the thinking end of everyone's nervous system, all sane, ordinary people. If you take that as being the king, does it have children? What is being an adult? What is growing up? What is becoming sane and stable? It's getting to the point, just as that kid over here that I just mentioned that says, geez, have I got a lot to learn, and geez, do I hate it? That's one of the benefits of an ordinary person finally growing up. You don't have to think anymore. Now, I know nobody conceives of it that way, but that is, I hate to say it, but since we met our building fund need, and I don't need you people saying more contributions, to hell with you. I'm going to tell you the truth. The Lord laid it on my heart to tell you the truth tonight. Part of growing up, part of getting old, or grown. That sounds better. Well, just in case we ever have to raise some more money, I guess I shouldn't completely burn all of the bridges. It's the kind of examples that we brought out before. It would appear to be, you could explain it other ways, especially if there was a tinge of sardonic humor to say, well, part of people growing up, getting mature, is ending up married, pregnant, or getting somebody pregnant, going in debt, having to get a job, and it's like you just kind of give up. Here you are at 25, and, geez, I may live another 40, 50 years, but for all intents and purposes, my life is crap. All right, it could sound like that, but I suggest to you there's more at work, and it has nothing to do with marital status, debts, and etc. It has to do with the flow of energy. That which runs the secondary world has to do with that. The change of generations, which is growth. The real aspect, we're down to right where the primary meets the verbal, and that's why people can only describe it in examples that seem to be cheap shots. Or it would even seem to be reversible or avoidable. Like, well, if I hadn't, a guy could say, if I had not gotten that woman pregnant when I was 17, then I would not have had to go to work in my uncle's body shop. I could have pursued my musical career. I could still be footloose and fancy-free here 50. I might not have gotten so fat because I wouldn't have been married to her and she wouldn't have kept making those old cheap foods and feeding me butter. I would still, even here I am 50, I would still be trim. I'd be good looking. I would be wearing an up-to-date haircut. I could be driving a Corvette instead of this damn station wagon. And it appears that they could have avoided that. What I'm telling you is in response, if you hadn't lost your place, secondary kings have no progeny. What is really happening is when somebody matures, when somebody becomes their own king, that you have grown up and you have now become Mr. Tit or Miss Tat, Fred and Ethel. When you finally become that person, I know the external trappings would appear to be that you have settled down, got a job, gone in debt, become a regular member of the middle class. What I'm telling you, the basis of it is you reach the point and you do not even have to worry about thinking anymore. And it comes out this way. Again, this is not the point. And this is not the proof, because real proof is no proof. It is if you were the kind who thought a little more than just some bricklayer who is living in a house trailer and driving an old station wagon, 7 kids. If you aspired, if you assumed that we're talking about somebody of a slightly higher social niche, then it would be your political opinions, your social attitudes have stabilized. That you are a living reactionary, as you're supposed to be. But you no longer think. Not that what you think is wrong for you people out there. If you have grown up and now you've matured and you become, let us say, to use Western terminology, a conservative, right-wing, reactionary, political animal, that's all you read, that's all you pay attention to, and you find that most of the press, most of the media is too liberal, too progressive, too left-wing. It's not that you're wrong, but from a revolutionist view, you're dead. We got the semi-solemn requiem for the partially deceased that we're not going to get to as knowing tonight. It's not that what you think is wrong, but you understand the point is, and I could use the other example, the other way around, of course, that you have turned out to be liberal, left-wing, and progressive, and etc. It's not that that's wrong and the other's right. What has happened is you no longer have to think. Secondary kings, once they become king, they have no progeny. You're not going anywhere. You're not turning out any kid. Oh, you can physically have children, of course, but you do suspect this could be a matter of the big M. Memphis metaphor. The king, once you become stabilized, once you become grown, what's the point? There was another Kyroot in there we won't get to. That guy that was pondering. You remember the king that was pondering, which was dirty to make a king do it. That as he began to suspect, if you stripped a priest, what would you find inside? A kid. And if you stripped a kid, you'd find an old man. It would appear to be backwards, which is not true, but it would appear to be backwards. That now as you're grown and you're a king, according to this, that kings have no progeny. If you stripped the king, what would you find? In a sense, you'd find a nascent, an inchoate prince. You'd find an unviable issue. In other words, you would find the potential that you could have thought, in the sense we talk about around here, that you could have thought outside of, for instance, being right-wing, left-wing, Christian, Jew, Protestant, tall, short. Not that any of them's right or wrong. They're all movements of energy. But once you become a king in the secondary world, once you are matured, once you know what you're doing, all this stuff is bullshit. And I'm being charitable again about it. Because it's really, I don't want to pile any more adjectives because we're running out of time. On top of that, well, it's insane. It's just nuts. And it could be worse. The more that you are a king, if you're an ordinary person listening to this, and you have good, serious views politically or religiously, you can listen to stuff like this and think, wait, that stuff's not just nutso. That stuff is dangerous. That's some kind of trick. He keeps saying stuff about, well, this is kind of nuts. Most people don't need it. But that's dangerous. Absolutely out. Good night. You still rolling audio for out of towns? Yeah. Okay, well, there's just one or two more here. I'll hit them right quick. If they don't hit me. To try and scratch their itch, you know, scientists and explorers look without, mystics and philosophers within. The revolutionist, however, is another case. He takes off his glasses and splits. Corollary, if you know where a particular artist is, where he lives, he ain't no artist. Wait a minute, I know what I think about that. You may. That's like ordinary people spending their whole life saying, I've spent my whole life, yes, trying to know myself. Of course, I've never met anybody sane that would say they actually succeeded, because part of the proof of showing how intelligent is to say, well, no, not yet. You know, got to keep the butler from actually buttling. No, not yet, but I'm working on it. But the closer you feel like, yes, I know where the artist in me lives. The closer you get to it, I guess it's kind of like we have dug up, instead of Marler or Handel, it's kind of you dug up Lewis Carroll. The closer I get, the farther away it gets. I don't know if it had any connection with anything he ever wrote, but that was the only thing I could think of, other than referring to Kyroots. If you know where a particular artist is, where he lives, where you can find him, he's no artist. Or if there was such a thing instead of artist, how about real information? And now you are privy to the library. The library of history. All right, if it's in there, that ain't it. Same thing. Which, somewhere between dangerous and crazy, right? In other words, what I want to know, I may not know it personally, and I hadn't met him about it personally, but if we could dig up, revise the great library of Alexandria, which is supposed to be even better than the one in Lexington or New York. That anything you want to know is there. All right, if it's there, that's not what you want to know. Not if you want to know what an artist knows. Corollary, if you know where a particular artist lives, where he is, he's no artist. Then brackets inside the, what do you call those things? Parentheses. Then a stranger resembling Kyroots stumbled on the scene and added, I feel it incumbent upon me to note that there is no such thing as a corollary. Only, reference back if you remember last time, reference, only, was an old man talking to a kid last time, do you remember? Only, quote, our kind of thinking which should leave a lot out anyway. What is a corollary? What is an addendum? What is a PS? Easy, right? How about this? What is a progeny of a king? If you're going to write a second symphony, what the hell was wrong with your first one? You didn't know what you were doing. Too much? All right. Why did you put an epilogue? Why did you put a second edition of your book? Your first book was entitled Everything That All Humans Want to Know by me, Mr. Wonderful. All right. But then you find out, you look down there, and here is revised edition. Nobody notices it. They revised the Bible. They revised the Quran. They go through, well, there have been some errors here. Let's straighten them out.